This is Jonathan Ferguson, the Keeper of Firearms and Artillery at the Royal Armouries Museum in the UK, which houses a collection of thousands of iconic weapons from throughout history. And this week, in anticipation of its upcoming Phantom City DLC, he's taking another look at the weapons of Cyberpunk 2077.
Why does it have teeth? And why is that not the first time I've asked that question on this series?
Make sure to subscribe and let us know what other games or guns you'd like to see Jonathan break down in the comments section below. Right, let's take a look at the guns of Cyberpunk 2077.
Right, first reactions on this is it's remarkable how you can make a revolver look sci-fi just by putting a huge, great big barrel shroud on it. Probably put one on a single action army and it would look sci-fi. That's not to disparage the designers because they haven't just slapped that on some existing design. It's an original design and it all blends in quite nicely. I do like the look of it. It's big, it's chunky. The revolver needs to bring something else to the table. I think here that is a lot of power. I don't know what the specs are of its ballistics or anything, or indeed what that great big shroud actually does other than look cool. The open trigger guard is, I think, questionable. Questionable in the sense of I question why the need to do it, and in the more specific sense of you're going to potentially have safety issues. If you've already cocked the revolver, you're going to accidentally press the trigger. The trigger on single action is super light on just about everything. It's just, it doesn't make sense to not have the trigger guard there, basically, other than to look cool. Smart shotgun, eh?
But instead of shooting shot, it just shoots 8 barrels at the same time.
So it's a volley gun, not a shotgun. Yeah, so intriguingly, this thing is billed as a shotgun, but is really a volley gun. It's multiple barrels firing at once. We do have, obviously, multi-barrel shotguns, but each of those barrels is designed to discharge, well, typically 9 pellets of buckshot, say, but the primary purpose is to deliver shot from each barrel. Here, we've got only slugs and only one per barrel. So they're all going at once. This is a volley gun. I can't think of any modern volley guns with a barrel per piece of shot. It's even more of a throwback, actually, in that the magazine is really a reloadable set of chambers, more like a mitrailleuse, French early machine gun, which is fired, and that's not a volley gun. They're firing in sequence, but that has a reloadable block of chambers, which is quite reminiscent of this.
All 8 barrels fire at once, and then you get like 8 barrels 4 times. So the magazine has 4 shots of 8.
Okay, all right, okay. This is even more interesting than I thought it was then, because this is a volley gun in that they all fire at once, reloadable chambers, a bit like a mitrailleuse, and also, it seems, superposed loads. And it's powder, bullet, powder, bullet, powder, bullet. You can do 30 shots if you've got a long enough barrel, and then you ignite them in sequence, usually just like a Roman candle, and they all go one after the other. This is selective, but it's embodying several very old concepts in firearms, so it's pleasing me in that respect. Now, you were thinking FG42, Dave, but I've decided to subvert expectations and show you this bizarre prototype, which is in fact inspired by the FG with this side-mounted magazine, as is this game gun, but is not an FG42. It's a rare prototype, 1950s, and it is the SGG 54. So I went with this because A, it's rare and I like to show off cool stuff from the Royal Armouries collection, and B, because I think it looks more cyberpunk than an actual FG42 does. Now, this thing doesn't really look that much like either of them, to be honest. It's way more sci-fi. We can see a barrel, we can see a big muzzle brake there. There's a folding foregrip that looks a heck of a lot like the MP7 folding foregrip to me. That looks a bit fragile for what this thing is trying to do, although I don't know how heavy it really is. Now, one aspect that definitely is more FG42, and I do agree. I think they've started out with the FG42 as their inspiration and then gone absolutely left field with it. But the cocking handle does look a little bit FG. The magazine's a bit curious. So on the STG 54 there, and on the FD42, and the other handful of rifle caliber arms that have magazines coming in from the side, they come in straight from the side. Two reasons for that, I think. One, perpendicular is always better for working out feed, angle of presentation and everything. And also, if it's canted down like that, it's potentially going to foul your own hand, or your hand will foul it and make it more awkward to carry. So it's pretty unusual to see a magazine coming in at a random angle. I'm sure there are examples, can't think of any at the moment. I'm sure the comments will. But yeah, typically it's going to be straight in from the side, straight in from the top, or most typically straight in from the bottom. Yeah, I can't quite tell if they've seen the Shogun shotgun design with that exposed breech block setup, or if they've just sort of extrapolated what a very large bolt would be like if you didn't have a cover on it. But either way, it does end up looking quite a bit like that vintage firearm. Otherwise, though, this looks pretty modern. Real world wise, magazine-fed shotguns keep being invented. Sorry, conventional vertical box detachable magazine shotguns. There are plenty of magazine shotguns that are tube mags, which generally makes more sense because you're going to get more rounds in the tube. But there are lots with external box mags like this. It does bring to mind something like a Saiga, but there are others out there, including conversions of things like Remington 870s. I'm guessing this is not the stock color scheme because it makes it look a bit like a Nerf gun or something. The sight is unusual in that it's very vertical. It's not usually desirable to have such a tall window because it makes the whole thing more bulky, and it doesn't increase your field of view. Typically, you're less worried about the vertical plane for the framing, hiding enemies or whatever, than you are the horizontal. So a broader picture and field of view makes sense. No framing at all would be the ideal. And with this level of technology, it's kind of surprising that it isn't frameless. It certainly, as a sort of mini heads-up display, it, like all the sights in the game, it fits the aesthetic. I have to commend the graphics on this in basically every respect, but the detail of the weld there is really nice. So there's a top sight and rail system there that is welded onto the top of that, what looks like a sheet metal receiver, which makes sense. So if you're forming your receiver from sheet metal, you then have to weld on some sort of rail. Whereas if you're machining it from solid, you're going to machine your sight mount into that, most likely. So it's super secure and don't have to worry about aligning and fixing that rail onto the gun. So as an alternate near future 1980s based design, kinda, I actually like that design detail, and the way it's been done is really nice. To see the lighting reflecting off each little bit of weld, that's very cool. I'm looking at the gold bolt there, which is like it's titanium nitride or something, and it has the gas relief holes of an AR-15 bolt, which are there on the real gun because the piston in the AR-15 is the bolt stem, and so once the gun is unlocked, it needs holes for this spare gas to be got rid of from, and that's what those are here. So that depression in the side of the bolt and the two holes, they're a lift from the AR. I don't imagine that they're doing that function in this gun. This looks like lots of detail on this bolt carrier to make it look plausibly like a bolt carrier, but I don't think anything on there is actually doing anything, but it looks like it could, and that's what matters. Why does it have teeth? And why is that not the first time I've asked that question on this series? Repeating myself, but the warning labels and things and labels like that, I always enjoy. Lots of good near future sci-fi likes to do that. We do have that on contemporary firearms, not exclusively, but especially in the States, where there's, capable of firing with magazine removed, or please refer to manual before fire. usually mandated by, well, always, in fact, mandated by some sort of law, and not usually that visible. That's the thing. They legally have to be there, so they're there. They're big enough to read, but you have to kind of look for them to see them, because most people don't want warning labels all over their cool guns. But in the future, it seems, warning labels are cool, and they're more like something on an aircraft or a missile or something. This thing's very unusual, very busy looking. Lots of random angles and surfaces. Well, I say random, they might not be, but they appear to be somewhat random. A belt feed mechanism that looks like it's a mechanism. Not sure how it works in detail. Unusual pink color scheme with some stickers on there that look a bit sort of Sex Pistols inspired, or one of them does. Not sure what that is. That's presumably some in-universe literature that I'm not familiar with. Big carry handle shape there. Yeah, it's maybe a bit busy, but it definitely has a business-like air to it, despite being very punky looking.
I actually want to read you the database entry for this because I think it does a better job than I could at contextualizing it. So it's called the Budget Arms Slaught-O-Matic. Night citizens disagree on a lot, but there's one common platform that they share. A gun should be available for everyone, no matter the thickness of their wallet, their age, their criminal history, the time of day, and most importantly, no questions asked. You can buy this single-use pistol from most vending machines for a price not much higher than a can of Cola. At first glance, you can clearly see why. It's made from the cheapest plastic, liable to not only melt if left out in the sun, but also prone to jamming, breaking, and snapping inexperienced wrists with its high recoil. Still, a gun's primary purpose is to kill, and that's what it does. But when you fire the last round, don't bother reloading, just toss it in the trash and buy a new one.
Interesting. So there's been some sort of radical shift in firearms attitudes and legislation, I would suggest. Disposable pistol. Well, we know about at least one disposable pistol, the Liberator of World War II. Not single use though. So the Liberator was intended for as many shots as you could get out of it before it blew up or fell apart, and came with, I think, 2 spare rounds in its own grip. Plastic. Well, yes, we can make guns out of plastic. There's no real reason why it should be so fragile unless it has no steel barrel or titanium or whatever metal barrel and bolt or breech, which it probably ought to have. But so this is what's conflicting me, is on the one hand, it's super duper space polymer, in which case the barrel and bolt are somehow made out of plastic and should be robust enough for multiple shots, or it's cheap crap plastic like they say it is, in which case why isn't it blowing up at the first shot or the only shot? But as a concept, it's pretty funny and quite clever. So I'm jumping the gun, literally, insofar as single use means whatever rounds are in the gun and then it's empty. It doesn't, of course, mean a single shot, as the Liberator was a single shot. So this is a very slow machine pistol, or just a self-loading pistol with a sort of Uzi style cocking handle on the top. And I guess it says do not reload because you could easily hold back the cocking handle and shove in another round. They must have calculated the stresses and everything on this to the point where it shouldn't blow up for the number of rounds that are in the gun, I guess is the idea here. What does that label say? Oh, here we go. Warning, do not disassemble, do not dispose in fire, do not attempt to reload. Warranty valid for 20 rounds of preloaded ammunition. I'm not sure why there's
with 32 rounds, so you void your own warranty.
Amazing. I was
Halfway
about to ask you the same thing because I hadn't been paying attention enough to realize that. So that explains the accounts of them blowing up, because you're only covered if you fire 20 shots. And since it's automatic, you'd have to be pretty good to count how many rounds it is before you're then into the danger zone of the disclaimer. I wonder how that disclaimer stands up in court.
This is slow burst if you hip fire it, faster burst if you aim down sights, and if you hold it down, you can go full auto.
So that's quite an unusual take on selective fire. There are trigger-controlled selective fire designs. We've got an unusual prototype Sten gun here that controls the length of burst by how quickly you pull the trigger. wasn't successful. Burst fire is pretty controversial anyway as a function, but it might make a comeback with this kind of technology. Well, I say this kind of technology, a high level of technology where you let's say you have electronics on board the gun because you're running your sights off them, and I do note the very cool projected sight on this with backup irons. Therefore, you've got batteries, you've got electronics, so you may as well have a system for programmable cyclic rate, length of burst, and maybe other features. If the bullets are big enough to have a payload, to allow you to adjust the sensor fusing of that kind of thing. But it's probably inevitable that we will have more electronic firearms. So this is presumably using electronic. I mean, it clearly is for the sight. Very slick design. I'm not a fan of gold bling type things, but this is a really nice looking design. If that's the Gucci end of the market for this gun, this would be the ordinary end. This would be the Primark. Sorry, Primark. So Dave's identified that this is reminiscent of the PM63. I think I agree with him. In terms of kind of form factor and this big chunky front end here, if this was blockier, yeah, I think it would fit. You've got the overhang at the back, you've got the slim slide setup. Unlike I think the barrel reciprocates on the game gun. In this case, it's an enveloping slide, and it's actually an open bolt gun. I mean, this is actually quite an original design, but this thing is not far off, and just very cool, compact, and I think looks cyberpunk in its own right. I think you could put this in the game, and a lot of people wouldn't know that it wasn't a real world firearm.
I'm not sure if you caught it at the start, but that bit on the back as well is a fingerprint scanner.
Ah, I did not catch that. That's interesting. Well, that raises some interesting contemporary arguments as well. A biometric scanner. We're seeing that in sci-fi, and we see it every few years in the firearms world as well. Someone tries to invent a, quote, smart gun that is keyed to a user or a particular group of users. The obvious utility of that is for police. If their weapon is taken, it can't be used against them. There are other arguments, pro and con. A lot of people are against them for reliability reasons. If you, I mean, imagine having to just wait while I just try and get my fingerprint. Like, if you ever have any issues with your phone unlocking that with your fingerprint, imagine how much more stressful it is if you're trying to unlock your gun before a gunfight. So there are all sorts of arguments, political, legal, social, going on about smart guns as the technology gets closer to something that might actually work. Because of course, the first time one fails to work, you're going to have lawsuits, and it's going to go badly.
¡Te voy a sacar el puto corazón!
Another intriguing design. Immediate element of AR-15. We've got a enlarged paddle AR-15 style charging handle there that looks like it's straight off an AR-15. That's a bit too much like an AR-15 charging handle, but similar as on the MP7, but it's a different design. I might have changed it up a bit from this if it was me, but I'm not the designer. But the gun's really cool, and so I've got one small AR element and then a big AK element. Those look an awful lot like AK mags, and they're even doing the push out the empty mag with the fresh reload. But then the rest of the gun is super high tech, its own thing. But you can't put a big long curved magazine on a gun, especially one that rocks in, without people thinking AK. But for example, the gas system on it, that looks like something from, I don't know, FN Scar. The barrel shroud, at the moment the trend is, for practical reasons, toward handguards with lots of space for attaching bits of rail that you then attach bits of accessories to. This seems to be a reversion to the handguard as a heat shield and a comfort thing. I think that's unlikely. I think the ability to add accessories isn't going away now, and even firearms with polymer handguards integrate rails into them now. But that locks you into a certain aesthetic, pretty much. Even with AKs, they'll have this, if it's not a quad rail, it'll be a M-lock or other negative space machined metal, and it all looks very similar. So they've got to change it up, and they've gone with something pretty distinctive. And they have the advantage of it being essentially a parallel universe branch off before those festooned with nonsense capabilities were actually fully realized. So they're able to do their own thing. Literally artistic license. Thanks for watching, everyone. That was part 3 of the Cyberpunk 2077 guns. Really quite an intriguing game, hence we've done 3 parts on this. Hope you enjoyed it. As we always like to say, if you'd like to come and visit us here at the Royal Armouries, we've got 3 museums in the UK. If you can't, we've got various things going on online, including our own YouTube channel. If you're moved to donate to us and help support what we do, we still have a link on the website to do that as well. But regardless of all of that, we will see you again here next week.